My name is Dorothy Callum. I spent 31 years of my life working as a hospital billing coordinator, and before that, I raised two sons mostly on my own after my husband Raymond passed from a heart attack when the boys were still in grade school. I know what it means to carry weight quietly, to smile at people in the hallway and never let them see how tired your bones are. That was the life I built, steady, careful, invisible in the way that older women often become invisible, and I had made my peace with it. When I retired, I thought the quiet would be a gift. And for a while, it was. I planted tomatoes in the backyard. I video called my younger son Marcus every Sunday. I read books I had been putting off for 20 years. But the truth is, retirement has a way of showing you exactly how much of your identity was wrapped up in being needed somewhere. By the end of my first year, the house felt less like a home and more like a waiting room. So when my neighbor Paulette mentioned that the pharmacy 2 miles down on Archer Road was looking for a part-time cashier just mornings, she said, "Nothing strenuous." I put on my good shoes and went in the very next day. I was 63 years old. I told the manager, a young man named Derek, who looked barely old enough to shave, that I had 30 years of experience handling numbers and dealing with difficult people, and I would not call in sick for anything short of a natural disaster. He hired me on the spot. That was how my mornings began to have shape again. I worked the early shift, 6 in the morning until noon, 3 days a week. The pharmacy sat on the corner of a quiet stretch of road in a part of Memphis that had seen better decades. The neighborhood was not dangerous exactly, but it was tired. The kind of tired that comes from being overlooked for too long. Most of our regulars were elderly, picking up blood pressure medications and insulin, counting out exact change with arthritic fingers. I learned their names. I learned which ones needed an extra minute, and which ones just wanted to be in and out. To get to work, I took the Route 14 bus, which came at 5:40 in the morning, and dropped me half a block from the pharmacy. There was almost never anyone on it that early, just me and the driver, and sometimes a young woman in scrubs who I assumed worked at the hospital on the other end of the line. The first driver I had was a heavyset man named Carl, who never said much beyond "good morning" and "you have a blessed day." That was fine by me. I am not one of those people who needs to fill silence. But Carl retired in November of my first year working at the pharmacy, and the week after Thanksgiving, I boarded my bus at 5:40 in the morning and found a different man behind the wheel. He was tall, even sitting down, lean, with close-cropped gray at his temples, and a neatness about him that reminded me of men from my father's generation. The kind of man who ironed his shirts not because someone told him to, but because he believed it mattered. He had a small thermos wedged between the console and his seat, and when he noticed me scanning my card, he gave me a nod that was both a greeting and an acknowledgement. Formal but not cold. "Morning," he said. "Good morning," I said, and took my usual seat 3 rows back on the left side. His name? I would learn a few days later when I finally thought to look at the ID placard near the front, was Ernest Webb. Ernest was quiet the way Carl had been quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. Carl's silence was comfortable emptiness. Ernest's silence felt inhabited, like there was something sitting in it with him. Some mornings I would board the bus and catch something in his eyes in the rearview mirror. Not sadness exactly, but the shadow of it. The way a room looks after someone has just left. I am not a woman who pries, but I am a woman who notices. It started on a Tuesday in December, the second week of Ernest's route. The temperature had dropped to 22 degrees overnight, and the bus stop had no shelter. By the time Ernest pulled up, I had been standing in that wind for 7 minutes, and my fingers were white inside my gloves. I settled into my seat and realized I had done something I almost never did. I had brought 2 cups of coffee that morning. Every morning I stopped at the gas station on my corner before walking to the stop. Small black coffee, extra hot, in one of those paper cups with the cardboard sleeve. That morning, without thinking about it, I had grabbed two. Perhaps because it was so cold. Perhaps because some part of me knew, though I could not have told you what it knew. I sat with both cups for a moment, felt the heat through the cardboard. Then I stood up and walked to the front. "Excuse me," I said. "I accidentally bought two this morning. Would you like one?" Ernest looked at the cup, then at me. There was a pause that felt longer than it was. "I wouldn't want to take your coffee, ma'am." "I have one," I said. "This one has nowhere to be." A corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but close enough. "Thank you," he said, and took it. He did not say anything else. But when I got off at my stop that morning, he said, "Stay warm," and there was something genuine in it that had not been there before. After that, I brought 2 cups every morning I worked. I did not make a thing of it. I would board, scan my card, walk to the front, set the cup on the edge of the console without comment, and take my seat. Ernest would nod. Sometimes he would say thank you. A few times he said nothing at all, and I could tell it was not rudeness, but the particular silence of a man who was not used to being on the receiving end of small kindnesses and did not yet know how to carry them. By February, we had graduated to brief conversations. I learned that he had grown up in Memphis, left for 15 years, and come back to take care of his mother when she got sick. His mother had passed 8 months before I met him. He had stayed because there was nothing pulling him back to where he had been, and Memphis, at least, had his memories. He learned that I was a widow, that my older son lived in Atlanta and called less than he should, that my younger son Marcus was good about checking in, but worried about me in a way that sometimes felt more like surveillance than love. I told him that in a way I meant to be funny, and he gave me the real smile that time, not just the corner of his mouth. "My daughter's the same way," he said. "Calls me every night at 8 o'clock whether I like it or not." "Do you like it?" I asked. He thought about it longer than I expected. "Some nights," he said. We did not talk about why only some nights, but I understood it. When grief is still close, other people's love can feel like pressure on a bruise. By April, Ernest's coffee sat on the console before I even walked to the front. He had started positioning it so it would not spill when he opened the doors. A small adjustment, the kind of thing you only do when you have stopped thinking of something as an imposition and started thinking of it as part of the morning. I will tell you honestly that I did not think about any of this in any particular way. I was not lonely in a way I recognized as loneliness. I was simply a woman who had found a small routine that made the cold mornings warmer, and a man who seemed to need some evidence that the world still noticed him. That is all I thought it was. Until the Thursday in May when everything changed. It was a regular morning. I boarded at 5:40, handed Ernest his coffee, took my seat. The sun was finally coming up early enough that the ride was not entirely dark, and I remember watching the streetlights flick off one by one as we moved down Archer Road. There was something peaceful about it. That particular stillness that exists before the city remembers what it is. We passed my stop. I felt it before I fully registered it. The bus did not slow. The corner of Archer and Delman went by the window, and I turned to look, and it was behind us, and Ernest was still driving, his eyes forward, no indication that anything was wrong. My first thought was that he had simply forgotten. It happens. Carl missed my stop once in his last week and apologized for 10 minutes. I stood up slowly and walked toward the front. "Ernest," I said, keeping my voice even. That was my stop. He did not look at me. He kept his eyes on the road. "I know," he said. Something in his voice stopped me from saying anything else. It was the same voice he always used, calm and measured, but there was something underneath it that I had not heard before. A kind of careful control. The voice of someone concentrating very hard on not alarming you. "Is everything all right?" I asked. "Sit down, please, Miss Dorothy." He still had not looked at me. "I'm going to pull over in 2 blocks, and I need you to listen to what I have to tell you." I sat down. My heart was going faster than it had any business going. I watched the back of his head and tried to read something from the set of his shoulders, but he was steady, precise, the same as always. He turned left on a residential street I did not recognize and eased the bus to the curb behind a row of parked cars. He turned off the overhead news feed. Then he turned in his seat and looked at me, and what I saw in his face was not panic. It was something more deliberate than that. The expression of a man who had made a decision and was committed to seeing it through. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to hear me out before you say anything." "Can you do that?" "Yes," I said, though my voice was thinner than I wanted it to be. "There's a man," he said. "He's been on this bus 3 times in the last 2 weeks. He boards 2 stops after yours, sits in the back, and he gets off at Delman and 5th, 1 block from the pharmacy. He's never spoken to you, but he watches you. Every time, the whole ride." I stared at him. "I've been driving buses for 9 years," Ernest said. "You notice things. You pay attention to who looks at what and for how long and why. This man is not looking at you the way someone looks at a stranger. It's deliberate. And he follows you off the bus with his eyes until the doors close. Maybe he just—" I started. "Miss Dorothy." Ernest's voice was gentle but firm. "This morning, when you got off yesterday, I know you worked yesterday, even though it's not usually your day, he was already at the stop. He was there before the bus. He knew you'd be there. The cold that moved through me then had nothing to do with temperature." "Did he get on this morning?" I asked. "Yes," Ernest said. "He got off 2 stops back when I didn't slow down for Delman. I think he realized something was different." I sat with that. Outside, a dog was barking somewhere down the block. A sprinkler was running in someone's yard, and the sound of it was so normal and so domestic that it felt bizarre against what I was feeling. "How long?" I asked. 2 weeks certain," he said. "Maybe longer. I only started to notice a pattern 2 weeks ago." "Do you know who he is?" Ernest hesitated, and in that hesitation, I understood that there was more. "I've seen him before," he said carefully. "Not on this route. I drove Route 7 until January. There was a complaint filed by a woman on that route, a younger woman. She worked at the salon on Beale, about a man who made her uncomfortable. I saw the description they circulated, and this morning, when I saw him at your stop before the bus arrived, I called dispatch. I did not know what to say. I kept thinking about the mornings I had walked that half block from the stop to the pharmacy. The mornings I had been the only person on the sidewalk. The mornings I had not thought to look behind me because I was 63 years old and I was going to work. And who on this earth would take an interest in that? "I'm going to call the pharmacy," Ernest said, "and let them know you're going to be a little late. I'll take you around to the side entrance on Glenwood. And I'm going to need you to tell me if you've noticed anything. Anyone who seemed to pay you unusual attention. Anywhere, not just on the bus." I thought hard. There was a man. I had not put it together until that moment. A man who had been in the pharmacy twice in the past month. Not a regular. He had not bought anything the first time he'd said he was waiting for a prescription to be filled, then left without it. The second time he had bought a pack of gum and watched me count his change in a way that had made me feel, briefly, like an animal in a zoo. I had dismissed it because you get strange customers, because I am 63 years old and I have learned, as older women learn, to dismiss the things that make us uncomfortable because the alternative is to seem difficult. When I told Ernest this, something shifted in his expression. "The pharmacy has cameras?" he asked. "At the entrance and above the registers," I said. "Okay," he said. "Okay." He said it twice. Not for me, but for himself, the way people do when they are reorganizing their thoughts. Then he picked up his radio and called dispatch, and I sat in that parked bus on a street I did not know and listened to the sounds of an ordinary Memphis morning and tried to remember the last time someone had taken something I said seriously enough to act on it. The pharmacy manager, Derek, was shaken when I arrived. He reviewed the footage with a police officer who came within 40 minutes, a woman, solid and unhurried, who asked me questions without making me feel like I had done something wrong by not noticing sooner. She asked about the man's physical description. She asked if I had any disputes with anyone, any legal matters, anything that might explain targeted attention. I did not. I was a retired billing coordinator who grew tomatoes and talked to her son on Sundays. I could not fathom what I represented to whoever this man was. The officer took the pharmacy footage and told me they would be in touch. She said that until further notice, I should vary my routine. Take different routes when possible. Not walk alone in the early morning. "Is there someone who can drive you to work?" she asked. Before I could answer, I heard from the doorway, "I can adjust my route." Ernest was standing at the pharmacy entrance. He had parked the bus on Glenwood and come inside, which I suspected was not something drivers were supposed to do. He was speaking to the officer with the same quiet deliberateness he brought to everything. "My route comes by here anyway," he said, which I was fairly certain was not entirely true. "I can make sure she's not walking alone." The officer looked at him, then at me. "Is that acceptable to you?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "That is acceptable." What happened next unfolded over 2 weeks, and I will tell you honestly that most of it I only learned afterward, because the police did not keep me closely informed, and Ernest was careful about what he told me in real time. What I know now is this. The man from the bus was identified from the pharmacy camera footage. His name does not matter to me, and I will not give it space here. What matters is that the officer who interviewed me recognized the description from another case. A woman, 2 neighborhoods over, who had reported feeling followed for over a month before she stopped reporting it because no one had taken it seriously. With the pharmacy footage and Ernest's account of what he had observed on the bus over 2 weeks, the case became something that could move. Ernest had, in those 2 weeks, written down the dates and times he had seen this man on the bus. He had noted the route, the time, the man's position in the bus, his behavior. He had done this quietly, without telling me, because he had not wanted to frighten me before he was certain. He had kept a small notebook in his sun visor, 9 days of notes. The kind of meticulous observation that, the detective later told me, made the difference between a complaint and a case. On a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks after Ernest drove past my stop, I got a call from the detective assigned to the case telling me that the individual had been taken into custody in connection with the other investigation, and that I should continue to take precautions, but that the immediate concern had been addressed. She thanked me for cooperating. I thanked her for taking it seriously. Then I sat in my kitchen for a long time without turning the lights on. I thought about all the mornings I had walked half a block in the dark and never once looked over my shoulder. I thought about how entirely ordinary my life was, and how none of that had been sufficient protection. I thought about a young woman on a different route who had stopped reporting something because no one listened, and I thought about what might have happened to me if Ernest Webb had not been a man who paid attention. He was a man who paid attention because grief had made him quiet, and quiet had made him watchful. He was a man who had come back to Memphis to take care of someone and then found himself without a purpose when that someone was gone. He drove a bus at 5 in the morning, and he kept a small notebook in his sun visor, And he accepted a cup of coffee without making a fuss about it, and all of those things together had built something neither of us had named or intended. I called him the next morning. He had given me his number after the incident, for emergencies, and I had not used it until now. "They told me it's been resolved," I said. "I heard," he said. "How are you?" "I'm not entirely sure," I said, which was the truest answer I had. "That's a reasonable place to be," he said. There was a pause, the comfortable kind. "I want to keep bringing you coffee," I said. "If that's all right with you, I'd appreciate that," he said. "And I'd like it if you told me about your daughter sometime," I said. "The one who calls you every night at 8. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had that quality I had noticed in the early days' inhabited silence. But something in it was lighter than before. "Her name is Renee," he said. "She's a teacher. 3rd grade. She's got my stubbornness and her mother's laugh, and she calls me every night at 8 o'clock whether I like it or not." "And tonight?" I said. "Will you like it?" He considered this with the same care he brought to everything. "Yeah," he said. "I think tonight I will." I did not return to walking to the bus stop alone. For the first few weeks, my neighbor Paulette walked with me, which she insisted on and which I accepted without too much protest, because I knew better than to argue with Paulette. Eventually, I adjusted my schedule, took the later bus when the streets were fuller, did the things the detective had advised. I was not fearful in the way I might have expected. I was, if anything, more awake, more present on the sidewalk, more inclined to look at the world around me instead of retreating into my own thoughts. And every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday at 5:40 in the morning, I boarded Route 14 with 2 cups of coffee. Ernest would nod. I would set his cup on the console. I would take my seat 3 rows back on the left side, and we would move through the quiet streets of Memphis in the particular peace of 2 people who have learned, a little late but not too late, that the world is still capable of surprising you with the caliber of the people in it. I am 63 years old. I grow tomatoes in the backyard. I talk to my son Marcus on Sundays. I work 3 mornings a week at a pharmacy on Archer Road, and I have learned what I perhaps should have known a long time ago, that kindness is not a performance, and it is not a transaction. You do not offer someone a cup of coffee in the cold because you expect it to save your life. You do it because it is cold, and they are there, and it costs you nothing, and it might mean something. You do it because your mother raised you to, and because Raymond, God rest him, did it for strangers his whole life, and always said a man who can't give what little he has doesn't know what he has. You do it and you don't keep score. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes the world keeps score for you. Be kind. Not because it will protect you, not because you will be rewarded, but because the alternative is a lonelier world, and there is already enough of that to go around. Be generous with the small things. The cup of coffee, the held door, the moment where you choose to pay attention when it would be easier not to. You never know what the person beside you is carrying, and you never know what your small decency might quietly make possible. From my heart to yours, this is Spirit Tales.